Hi, I'm Coral, and last summer I developed a bit of an obsession with a creature that swallowed me whole and tried to take my life. I was going to be spending the summer volunteering at a Komodo dragon reserve in Indonesia, and my parents were seriously freaked out that I'd get hurt. So they made me get every single vaccination the travel clinic offered and packed me this embarrassingly huge first aid kit. All the other volunteers on the program laughed at me when they heard about my vaccinations. Looks like we've got a bit of a hypochondriac on our hands, the group leader joked. Well, better safe than sorry, right? Also, my brother had said there were loads of snakes in Indonesia, and I hated snakes, so I'd looked up some videos on YouTube about how to fight off snakes. I'm not joking, I was prepared for anything. I called it my snake dance, and it went like this. See snake approaching. Freeze. If snake starts to chase me, grab a stick and start running around in a circle, tapping the stick on the ground all around me. If all else fails, climb up a tree and don't let the snake out of my sight. Watch it like a hawk. So, you see, I was ready. On the plane, I sat next to the group leader, and it was a pretty long flight, so I was bored. I offered to show him my snake dance. I even got out of my seat and was about to show him, but suddenly there was some turbulence, and over the loudspeaker, they said, "Will the lady dancing in the aisle please return to her seat at once?" I won't lie, it was pretty embarrassing. When we landed, we got taken to the Komodo Dragon Reserve and shown to our rooms. It was basically a glorified hut. We were staying in a small village inside the reserve, and I was kind of shocked. The toilets were outdoors, and everything was super gross. The ranger showed us around and told us to be careful at night because when it rained, the river would rise and could easily carry us away. Then he told us to look out for snakes, and I was about to interrupt with my dance when the group leader gave me a look which clearly meant, "Shut up," so I kept quiet. Suddenly, something started running towards us, and I screamed. I grabbed a stick, and then I realized it was a Komodo dragon. I couldn't believe we were actually seeing one. It ran right past us, like it was in a race, and then we saw what it was after. It was chasing a snake. The ranger told us to keep our voices down, and maybe we'd see the attack happen. The snake was still oblivious to the dragon, and then suddenly, the dragon leapt onto it and in 2 gulps swallowed it. "Whoa!" one of the guys said. It had happened so fast, I'd barely even seen it. "But they don't eat humans, right? The Komodo dragons, I mean," I asked nervously. Everyone just laughed, and our tour continued. I was so tired from the jet lag, and all I wanted was to go to bed. For dinner, they did a special welcoming ceremony for us with local dancers and local food. We had chicken and rice, and then a local delicacy that was deep fried and pretty spicy. I liked it though, so I ate loads of them. The ranger smiled at me as he bit into one and said, "Enjoying the grasshoppers, I see. Want more?" I spat it out so fast. Grasshoppers! I thought it was like a fried vegetable or something. For the rest of the night, I felt sick. Lying in bed, I knew it was just my mind playing tricks on me, but my stomach felt uneasy. So I decided to go to the toilet. It was pitch black, so I grabbed my flashlight. The toilet was only a 2-minute walk from my hut, but I still felt scared. It was so noisy outside. The crickets were chirping so loudly, and it made me even more nervous. The toilet was down by the river, so I walked quickly and tried not to think about all the creatures out and about. But then I heard something nearby. I quickly turned around, shining my flashlight, and then I froze. There was a little girl standing outside the cabin, and she was playing with something. She'd given me such a fright. But what was she doing outside so late at night? I started walking towards her, and she saw me. She brought her finger to her lips and said, "Shh." Maybe she wants to play a game with me, I thought. I was bursting for the toilet, but I needed to make sure she was okay. I walked towards her, and then her eyes went wide in shock and she ran. I almost laughed. I must have scared her. I realized I'd stood on something, and I looked down at my feet. I'd stepped on a snake's tail. This couldn't be happening. Maybe it was asleep. Did snakes even sleep? Well, this one was not asleep because suddenly it started moving. I managed to run just in time before it twisted around my ankle, and then it started to chase me. Everything I'd learned went out the window. I couldn't even find a stick. If I screamed, I'd wake everyone up and people already thought I was weird. So I just ran towards the river, thinking maybe it would lose me and I could hide behind some of the reeds there. The Komodo dragons slept out by the river, so they'd protect me if the snake came. I felt something wet on my ankle and thought it was the river. But then I looked down, and it was a snake's tongue. It was right next to me. I started kicking, hoping it would get scared and leave me alone. I was running so fast I dropped my flashlight. It landed on the ground and then I heard it smash. Suddenly I was in complete darkness. But I could still hear the snake slithering along. I tried to find my hut, but I was so lost. All I could see was the river, and that's where I was headed. I didn't even stop to think that maybe there were crocodiles in there or water snakes. I just leapt in. I stayed under the water until I couldn't hold my breath any longer. I felt something on my leg, and I screamed, completely forgetting that I was underwater. Gasping, I came up for breath and spat out all of the river water I'd almost swallowed. I realized it was just some algae that I'd gotten my leg tangled in. Luckily, the snake was nowhere to be seen. I pulled myself out of the water, crawled onto the riverbank, and lay there shivering. I'd been chased by a snake and almost drowned. I was so exhausted, I could barely move. I had to get back to my hut, though. What if the snake was still out there waiting for me? I must have fallen asleep, because the next moment, I felt something around my waist. For a second, I thought I was still at home, and that it was my pet dog, Biscuit. But then I realized I was outside and I was in Indonesia. The tightness got worse. Something was squeezing me and it was heavy. I tried to get up, but the weight was too much. It was pulling me down. Then its face came right up to my head, and I saw a large, gaping hole. And then the most horrific thing that could happen happened. Everything went really dark, and I thought I'd fallen into the river. I tried to reach up to the surface, but I was stuck. Everything was closing in around me, and it felt like I was drowning. I put my hand out to feel around, and then I started slipping. It felt like I was being squeezed down and pushed through a damp, sticky cave. Suddenly, I saw a bit of light, and then it was gone again. And then I realized where I was. I was inside the snake. It had swallowed me. I started panicking. I could barely breathe, and there was no way out. Surely I'd die in there. It felt like I was inside a really tight sleeping bag, except damp and hot. Maybe this was what it felt like inside the womb, I wondered. And then the reality of the situation came back to me. I was going to die inside this snake. I thought maybe I could crawl back out, but honestly, my body was so squished up inside the snake that I actually heard a crunching sound. I didn't know what it was at first, but then I realized it was my bones. Something inside me had just broke. I screamed out in pain, and it came out like a muffle, like my mouth was taped up. There was nowhere for the sound to go, no echo. Then the snake moved a bit, and I felt like I was being dragged along over some rocks. I gave up. I was too exhausted to even fight anymore. The snake had won, and then there was just stillness. This was not the death I envisioned for myself. Girl eaten by a snake, that was the last thought I remembered having. But then I heard screams and lots of loud voices. I felt like I was underwater. I could hear my name, but it was hazy, so hazy. And then I heard a really loud noise like a machete. And then there was a sliver of light and cool air, and then nothing again. I woke up in the hospital. The ranger was there, and so was that little girl I'd seen. And when they saw my eyes were open, they ran outside and grabbed our leader and some of the other volunteers. Everyone looked so pale and upset. "She's alive!" the group leader shouted. Oh my gosh, so I had almost died then. Then I remembered the snake and how it had swallowed me. My body was bandaged up, and then I felt a sharp pain. Some of my ribs had been crushed and broken. The little girl had seen it happen and told her dad, the ranger. He'd grabbed his machete and cut it open, and when he'd seen me lying inside, he'd passed out. Apparently, no one has ever survived being swallowed by a snake, and the people at the reserve thought I was some kind of saint. Our group leader said the only reason I was alive was because the snake had been old and had died after swallowing me. What? So they'd cut me out of a dead snake? This was getting crazier and crazier. And then a young guy appeared and asked if he could talk to me. I told him I felt sick, but he wouldn't leave me alone. He said he was a snake expert from a nearby reserve and never in his life had he met someone like me. Please, he begged me, please tell me how you survived. What did you do? It's like magic. But I had no idea. He kept talking nonstop about how incredible snakes are and that this snake was obviously very smart not to kill me, and said maybe I had a special power in controlling snakes. Then I thought about my snake dance, and I thought, maybe he's right. Maybe I am studying the wrong animal. My parents arrived and cried a lot, then made me fly home immediately with them. But just before I left, the snake guy appeared with a gift for me. He told me to open it only when I got back home. It was the snake skin, the snake that had died trying to swallow me. He'd made it into a bag for me. He also gave me his email and asked if he could write about me in a snake journal, and I said it was okay. And then we started emailing a lot. He called me his snake princess and said he couldn't stop thinking about me and that I would be a great asset to his snake team. Then he asked me if I'd like to come next summer and volunteer at his reserve and work with the snakes. And you know what? I said yes. I'd already been inside a snake's body and survived, so maybe it was time to dig a little deeper and get into a snake's mind.
Hi, I'm Samantha. When I first entered high school, I felt completely positive about it, and I thought that it was going to be the start of something great. It was a chance for me to make new friends, have new experiences, and hopefully to become more popular. But turns out it was harder than I thought. You see, in middle school, I was not exactly the most popular girl in my grade. I did have some friends, but I often felt ignored or that people didn't pay attention to me enough. I didn't want to have the same feeling all throughout my high school experience. But even though I was very optimistic going to high school, soon I noticed that I had a lot of the same feelings and difficulties that I had had in middle school. I just didn't seem to connect well with people and had trouble escaping the ideas that my classmates seemed to have of me that I was just a boring, generic girl. So I thought to myself, what can I do to get more attention from the people in my school? What will make me stand out? I started dressing differently and changing my look. I experimented with many different makeup and hairstyle options. I wore different clothes and I started to try to talk to people more, even though I'm very shy naturally. While these things gave me some small results, it felt like progress was being made too slowly. I just was not that satisfied with the results that I was getting. What else could I do? I wondered. What is going to make me seem as cool as Beverly, the new star of the cheerleading squad, or Allison, who is dating the captain of the soccer team? I thought and I thought and I thought, but nothing came to mind. My life was just too boring. But then I had an epiphany. Maybe that was the problem itself. My life was too boring! I needed to make myself seem interesting, relevant, cool. But how could I do this if I and everyone around me considered me to be uninteresting? Then I came up with it. I needed to start making things up in order to get more attention. I needed to tell lies. My mother had always told me when I was younger that it was bad to tell lies. But what she didn't tell me was that without the help of lying, it would be very difficult for me to seem interesting to my peer group. So, I decided to test out my lying theory. I figured that I would start with some small lies, just to see if people would believe me, and if they would give me more attention because of them. So one morning when I was walking into school, I saw a group of some moderately popular girls discussing the new Justin Bieber song. They all seemed to like it, and I knew one of the girls in the group, so I felt relatively comfortable going up and saying something to them. "Don't panic," I said to myself as I slowly approached the group. "They will believe you," I continued. Suddenly, I was standing right next to the group of 5 girls, and they all stopped and looked at me, not exactly sure what I was doing there. "That new Justin Bieber song is great, right?" I said. "Yes," said one of the girls. "I love it so much. I've been listening to it on repeat like all week." The other girls just sort of looked at me, unsure of what exactly my intentions were approaching the group. The one I knew just looked surprised. My heart started to beat faster because I knew I was about to tell a major lie. I gathered the courage and slowly opened my mouth to speak. "You know," I said, "I met him last July and he gave me his autograph and asked me to hang out." "Oh my God, shut up," said Karen, who was the most popular girl in the group and who was the leader. "Did you really?" "Yes," I said, carrying on with the lie as I showed them a picture of us together. "He's even more gorgeous in real life. You wouldn't believe it." The truth was that I did see him one time getting out of his car and took a quick picture with him, but nothing more. Where were you when you met him? Asked another girl who I could tell wasn't sure if I was telling the truth or not. Oh no, what do I say now? I thought. I knew that I had to come up with something believable. I was eating dinner in a fancy sushi restaurant, but I was getting bad reception on my phone. I wanted to check my text, so I stepped outside for a minute. It turns out he was eating in the restaurant right next door and also wasn't getting any service. He was standing outside trying to get service too. Oh my God, said Karen. So what happened next? Well, I continued on, slowly starting to feel more comfortable with the lying process. I could barely speak because I was so starstruck, but I managed to say, "Oh my God, you're Justin Bieber." He then looked up from his phone, smiled at me, and said, "Haha, yep." The group of girls now all seemed to be convinced, and they were giggling and making high-pitched drinking noises. So I carried on. I knew I had to act quickly because I knew he would only be standing there for a second and then he would go back inside. I needed to get his autograph. I had my clutch in my hand, which I knew had a marker in it, but I didn't have anything to write on, so I just said, "Can you sign my phone case?" "Sure," he said. So I took out my purple Sharpie and gave him my phone. He opened the marker, signed his name, gave me the phone and the marker back, said, "We can hang out later if you want." The girls were absolutely amazed by this information. They begged me to bring in the phone case, and whenever I ran into any one of them throughout the day, they excitedly came up to me to ask me more questions about the Biebs. I was only too happy to answer. When I went home from school that day, I knew that I had found what I was looking for, a way to actually get more attention from people in my school. This was amazing. That night, I got out an old phone case, found a purple Sharpie, and scrawled the words Justin Bieber across the back in a messy type of way that looked like a boy could have done it. When I brought it into school the next day, I was invited to sit at the popular table by Karen at lunch. Even though I had gone to both elementary school and middle school with Karen, she had barely ever spoken to me, let alone invited me to sit with her. When I watched her holding the phone case and inspect with a gleam of true amazement in her eyes, I knew I had struck gold. Over the next few weeks, I continued telling lies regularly in order to keep the attention coming in. I would tell the athletes in chemistry class that I was there when the Red Sox won the World Series in 2018. I told the nerds that I had seen every episode of The Big Bang Theory. I even told some girls in chorus that I had a special genetic variation that allowed my voice box to be more powerful so that I could sing like Adele. All in all, the lying was going very well. But unfortunately, one day I took it too far, and you will never believe what ended up happening. It all started on a Friday afternoon when a bunch of the popular kids were discussing going to the beach after class. Apparently, a cute lacrosse player named Brian had found a new spot where you could jump off of a cliff into the ocean. Of course, I desperately wanted to be involved in this trip. It would be the perfect way to bond with the popular boys and the popular girls at the same time, and solidify my status as being one of the cool kids. However, because I was on the fringes of this elite group of about 10 to 20 people, I wasn't sure that they would invite me. So, once again, I turned to my trusty new superpower, lying. "You know," I said to the group, suddenly becoming a part of the conversation, "I did some cliff diving in the Maldives when I went there with my cousin during spring break one year. A local cliff diver taught us how to do backflips. I could come and show you guys a good technique if you want." "No way," said Brian. "You can do a backflip? That's epic." One of Brian's friends chimed in and said, "Yeah, you should definitely come." I was in. My completely made-up cliff jump backflipping talent had piqued their curiosity just enough to get me a spot on the trip. So after school, I joined Karen, Allison, Brian, and about 10 of their friends, and we piled into cars owned by the older kids and started heading towards the beach after we stopped at our houses and picked up our bathing suits. Driving down to the ocean, I couldn't help but feel like I had finally made it. The sun was shining, I was hanging out with the popular kids, even riding in cars with boys who were a few years older than I was. It was truly amazing. In fact, it was so amazing that I had completely forgotten that I had promised to them that I could do a backflip off of a freaking cliff. My brief feeling of social euphoria ended very quickly once we got to the ocean. I could tell that Brian and his friends had actually found a real cliff jumping spot because after we got out of the cars, we were quickly walking over some very rocky terrain on our way to the cliff. "We're almost there," said Brian as we neared the water, and with a few more steps across the rocky terrain, we were there. From the top of the cliff, I could see for miles and miles straight out on either side. I could see a swimming beach nearby and some houses that were on the shore. I guess that the water was about 25 to 30 feet down, and there were some significant waves. It was absolutely terrifying. Okay, said Brian's friend looking at me. Why don't you go first and show us this amazing backflip? Yeah, I said, trying not to tremble. Sounds great. I then took off my shorts and shirt, so I was just in my bathing suit and slowly walked over to the cliff. By now, I could tell that some of the girls could see that I was nervous and were probably doubting my cliff jumping abilities. But I was determined to at least try to prove them wrong. So, they slowly walked out over the cliff, and then they began to chant my name. Samantha, 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 Samantha. They chanted as I approached the edge. I slowly looked over and could see the absolutely terrifying drop in all of its unwavering truth. Samantha, Samantha, Samantha. They kept chanting as I slowly turned around and got into position to leap off the cliff and do a perfect backflip, which I knew for a fact I could never do. As I stood there preparing to jump, it all just became too much. This lie of my backflipping talent had been like a balloon that had lifted me high into the air and got me invited on this trip. But now, it was as if someone had suddenly popped the balloon. I felt dizzy and faint, and all of a sudden, I passed out. I fainted right as I was about to jump off the cliff, and I fell into the ocean from 30 feet. Instead of doing a glorious backflip, I did a perfect belly flop. Luckily, the cold water instantly pulled me out of my dizzy spell, but I was struggling to swim. Brian and two of his friends saw this and quickly dove off the cliff to help rescue me. After several minutes of struggling, they helped pull me to shore. Everyone else had come down from the cliff too. I coughed up some water, pulled some seaweed out of my hair, and then just waited to see what would happen next as they were all huddled around me. "You've never been to the Maldives, have you?" said Brian at last. "Well, not exactly," I said, at which point they all groaned and shook their heads in disappointment. Then they started walking back up to the top of the cliff. The jig was up. My lies had finally caught up to me because they got out of control. From that point on, I tried not to lie as much. I didn't want to face any more situations where I was passing out on top of cliffs. But to this day, Karen still believes that I hung out with Justin Bieber. And that's what really counts. Did you like my story? Please tell me what you thought of it in the comments below. And don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more.